Zaki, you've been speculating about Melbourne being a hidden hotspot, and I've heard you talk about this for over the last year now. How is Melbourne doing as of right now?
The Melbourne market, I'd say for a good year and a bit, I've been speculating that is the city and the regional surrounding areas of Victoria, the place to buy. The reason behind that is because we've seen the Brisbane market rise 20-25%, the Perth market well in excess of that, and it was about time for the Perth and Brisbane markets to cool down, which is what we've already seen in the Perth market, which is why we took our buyers out of the Perth market about 2.5 years ago. The Melbourne market, some of the points that I've raised before, is that it is one of Australia's largest city, very similar to Sydney, and if not, it will overtake Sydney. And it makes no economic sense that property prices in Melbourne on average 40% less and similar to regional areas. And because of what had happened since COVID's lockdown, as probably one of the top cities that had the most amount of lockdown days in the world, and the bad state government management of Melbourne's financial affairs, people were spooked off Melbourne, investors or home buyers. And then we had a massive interstate migration during COVID from Victorians migrating to Queensland, and, areas like Hervey Bay and stuff in Queensland boomed, or Byron Bay in New South Wales. Those are short-term fundamentals. Melbourne as a market comes down to simple supply and demand. There is a massive demand for property and housing in Australia. The media has played a massive negative downplay on Melbourne over the years. They've really put a lot of focus on Melbourne's crime rates, and that may have appeared to be that the Melbourne market has slowed down. So the data has shown, yes, it is the only city that has gone backwards when every other city has gone upwards since the COVID lockdowns were finished. But for our buyers, for the ones that have actually even got onto the Melbourne market nearly a year and a half ago, they've actually already made equity. I have a recent example of a client that bought a brand new property north of Melbourne for around $450,000, and we've got now similar houses selling for $650,000 brand new. So how is it a market that has been, based on data, has gone backwards, yet our clients have made growth in those areas? And that comes to DDP's view on, yes, the market may be going backwards, but there are markets in markets. Which cities, which suburbs, which areas in a particular area should you be buying, regardless of what's happening in the surrounding area? So in terms of Melbourne as its future, we've already started seeing, I'd say in the last 90 days, data, CoreLogic, economists, experts, quote unquote, have been advising that the Melbourne market is now showing a turn, which is great for the buyers that got in and took our advice at DDP nearly a year and a half ago in buying property in Melbourne and Victoria, because it's nearly 40% less on average compared to, say, Sydney and surrounding areas of Sydney. So the Melbourne market is showing recovery. The data is already backing it up. That's confirming this, and I feel it's going to continue on for a number of years as it comes and catches up close to the Sydney market. So I'd encourage anyone who's looking at Australian-wide property in terms of investment to actually look at the Melbourne market, our regional Victoria, depending on your land size and property yield, but also not to downplay units, because units and apartments in Melbourne have significantly gone backwards. And we speak to a number of clients over the years. They share stories about how their apartments and units in Melbourne have not made any money and in fact have gone backwards. My advice on that is that if you do have an apartment or unit in Melbourne, as long as you've got it rented and it can pay the rent and the mortgage or the strata or body corporate expenses, I would be keeping that unit, and actually highly encourage anyone looking into the Melbourne market that might not have the capacity maybe to buy a house to actually look at Melbourne property and units, just not in massive high-rise buildings, because I think they're severely undervalued. I've seen one-bedroom apartments in Melbourne for nearly $350,000, somewhat even new. You're probably lucky to get a garage maybe in Potts Point in Sydney for that price. So Melbourne on a whole will catch up to Sydney, and it'll definitely be my hotspot or area to be looking for the next year and a half, 2 years.